Gail Brewer. Good afternoon, Borough President Brewer.
Thank you very much. I'm Gail Brewer, Manhattan Borough President. I could say ditto to the two previous speakers. And I will submit testimony, but summarize. I am Gail Brewer. I am the Manhattan Borough President. I want to thank Chair Roberts and everyone for all your hard work on the board. As some of you know, I've come to this board for over a decade, and each time I've urged the board to limit increases imposed on rent-stabilized apartments. But until last year, substantial rent increases were ordered year after year, and thank you for last year. Today I ask this board, in light of the data we both have seen clearly, it clearly shows that rent increases have substantially outpaced owners' costs. I am requesting, as others have, to order rent reductions of 4% for 1 year and 2% for 2-year renewal leases. I believe that these rent rollbacks are justified historically and based on the data, showing a 1.2% decrease in building operating costs. Thus, strictly on this year's data, it would be reasonable for the board to grant at least a rent rollback that matches the minus 1.2% PIOC decrease. But there are other factors that also argue for a further decrease. First, building owners, and I own a building, I don't have tenants, but I know exactly how much to the penny it costs to run. First, building owners see substantial enhancement of rental income whenever there is a vacancy and are regularly granted large, multiple increases for major capital improvements, MCIs. Second, testimony to the board by experts has demonstrated that excessive increases approved since the 2008 recession have overcompensated owners at the expense of renters. Both factors take longer-term trends into consideration. Given that the increases over the last 8-10 years have consistently tipped the balance of the income-expense ratio in favor of building owners, the board should correct this overcompensation, particularly when building owners have enjoyed substantial savings in energy costs. I join the tenants and housing advocates and my colleagues in government to call, as I stated, for a rent rollback of 4% for a 1-year lease renewals and 2% for 2-year lease renewals. I just want to state, because I know time is of the essence, the staff has maintained the year-to-year calculation of operating O&M, operating and maintenance ratios, which reflect an owner's projected net earnings after operating expenses. In the last 10 years, in the last decade, O&M has been the 60th percent range, with 2014 cost to income ratio at 60.6%, or a net earning of 39.4 cents out of every dollar of rental income collected. So I believe that their own data of the Rent Guidelines Board shows the need for the rent rollback. I do want to thank you for all the work that you've done regarding the SRO. I know Ann Cunningham is here, as she has been for the last 100 years. And I want to thank her for her commitment, but also yours for keeping the rents at the same level for another year, which would be a 0% increase. So I hope the board will do its part to help us address our affordable housing crisis, vote for a rollback, and recognize the multiplier effect its increases have had on the present crisis in affordable housing. Thank you very much for all of your hard work.
Thank you. Any questions? No questions.
Thank you very much.
The next 3 speakers will be Hal Dorfman, Joyce Goodman, and Lauren Renz.
Hello and good afternoon. My name is Hal Dorfman. I'm a private owner of an 8-family building where 7 of my tenants are rent stabilized. I had a burglary in my building last year and I spent $4,000 to put a new video intercom system in with new security cameras to make that tenant feel safe. I applied for an MCI in January. It's 6 months, and I have not even heard from them to get a $2.50 per room increase. That will take me over 15 years to pay back that $4,000 that I spent freely to improve my building and make my tenants feel comfortable. This year alone, I've had $2,500 increase in real estate taxes. I'm not subsidized, I'm not a government entity, I don't provide affordable housing. I provide good quality housing to people who want to pay rent in New York City. I had $600 in water increases, and I had $1,200 in insurance. That's a 25% increase in my insurance. I would like to paint my hallways. It'll cost me $3,200 to paint the 4-story walk-up hallway and polish the steps to make my building look nice for my tenants. I don't get an MCI for that. I don't get anything for that. I just want to make my building look good and make my tenants feel pleased to come home at night. At a 2% increase, if you granted that to me, and here's my hat, I'm begging for a 2% increase. It would take me they would get $20 on average of my tenants a month. That's $240 a year. I don't think that's a big increase. I don't ask how these people earn their living, and they shouldn't ask how I earn my living. It should be a 4% increase for 1 year, and that would be fair. The CUNY employees got a 10% increase, I read in the paper, 10%. I'm asking for 2.
Thank you. Are there any questions for? No questions, thank you. Joyce Goodman.
I'm here on behalf of Assemblymember Daniel O'Donnell, and I'm glad to be able to present his testimony.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Daniel O'Donnell, and I'm a member of the New York State Assembly representing the 69th District, including residents of Manhattan Valley, Morningside Heights, and portions of Harlem and the Upper West Side. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss rent adjustments for renewal leases for rent-stabilized apartments. I'm here today to call for a rent freeze. I was pleased to see that the Rent Guidelines Board includes a proposal for 0% increases for 1-year lease terms and 0.5% increases for 2-year lease terms. I urge the board to take this bold step. Please be aware that anything higher than this will be an economic burden to thousands of families and individual renters who reside in my district and throughout the city at large. The main purpose for rent regulation is to protect tenants during an emergency housing shortage from the hardship of rent increases that are well beyond their means. It is the duty of the Rent Guidelines Board, when authorizing rent increases every year, to strike a balance between maintaining affordable housing for tenants and allowing landlords to maintain services and make a reasonable profit. For too long, however, the city failed to grasp who our tenants are and what incomes they have. The result is that more families find it difficult to pay rent. Once forced out of their apartments, low and middle income New Yorkers have fewer and fewer affordable housing options. In my community office, the crisis comes to life on a regular basis. We see many forced to choose between paying rents and other necessities. This was the case for a senior citizen who fell behind after an eye operation and another who was out of work for only a short period of time. We see those whose rent is well above 50% of their incomes, and they struggle every month and are chronically late in putting together the money owed to their landlord. We see families and children unable to find housing anywhere in the city and are doubled up in their parents' and overcrowded apartments. The difficulties my
Excuse me,
community...
I'm sorry, your time is up.
Okay.
You can submit the testimony.
Yes, it has been submitted.
Thank you.
I was almost done, so I just kept
Is there
going.
anything else you wanted to tell us? Is there any concluding thoughts you had in your testimony?
just how hard it is. It's really, I'm the housing point person in our office every day. That's all I do. And it's heartbreaking for me not to have an answer when someone says I can't afford the rent. I pay 60, 70, 80, 90%. I see people paying almost everything they have on a regular basis.
How often does that happen?
Happens all the time. Someone comes in, they can't pay their rent. I say, how much, what are you living on? Social Security. What are you living on? SSI. They can't do it. They can't pay their rent. They always end up going to the city for one-shots. Year after year, they're struggling. They don't have what it takes.
And how long have you been doing this for?
13 years.
And have you seen over the last 13 years, has the problem gotten better, worse, the same?
The city is being more generous now. The problem is not getting any better. It's about the same. It's about the same.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lauren Renz. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I hope you each have a copy of my testimony. My name is Lauren Renz. I own an 1890s brownstone in the West 80s. I've been a live-in owner-manager for 37 years. The house has 8 rental units, half are stabilized. Since 1979, I've made extensive improvements to the house. I have good tenants who tell me it's a great place to live. So great, the tenants in 3 stabilized apartments have been there since the mid-1970s, before me, and pay extremely low rents. Before you vote on the guidelines, I strongly urge you to consider the plight of owners like me with small, very old properties, long-term tenancy, and low rents. We should be recognized for maintaining these historic houses, not threatened for 3 years in a row with guidelines that mock our expenses. How to justify a rent freeze or even a 1% to 2% increase when my property taxes, which eat up 30% of rents, increased 8% this year? The mayor demands that I pay $3,000 more in taxes. It's unjustifiable that my stabilized tenants should not pay more in rent. 2 couples pay around $920 each, one pays $890. With 2-year leases, their rents have barely changed in 3 years. In New York's economy, these rents are unsustainable. The price index does not reflect actual changes in my operating expenses. While the cost of gas heat was about the same this winter as last, the boiler maintenance contract increased 6%, utilities 5%, water and sewer fees 2%, my supers fee 12%. I spent more than $10,000 to replace the extension roof and gutters and for repointing walls with leaks. These expenses do not qualify for MCIs. New building regulations have added a lot to costs. In 2015, I spent $3,200 for required boiler upgrades. The bill for monthly testing of my sprinkler system rose 11%. The cost to upgrade the system to pass the latest fire department inspection rose 85% compared with 5 years ago. I beg you to understand that historically low rent increases have way undercompensated owners like me with few apartments and a high share of regulated units. I ask that you vote for a 4% increase for a 1-year lease, 7% for a 2-year lease, but if you would consider a supplement for low rents, which we asked for many years, then the increase could be smaller. Thank you.
Any questions for this?
So I'm clear, you're asking for a 4% for 1 year and a 7% for 2-year lease?
Well, you haven't considered a supplement for
What?
low income, low rents for, I can't remember the last time. So under those circumstances and not having gotten increases above 1% 2 years ago and 0 last year, I am asking for that. I know.
And so this affects millions of tenants, those proposal, which could result in increase in homelessness around the city because people are just getting by. And most people, we've heard tenants, hundreds of tenants testify that they're struggling, and a 1% increase could mean they can no longer afford their rent. And you said you have 3 rent-stabilized tenants?
I have 4.
4 rent-stabilized tenants.
3 of them have been there, as I said, for almost 40 years.
Right.
And so their rents, as you can imagine,
Are lower.
are very low. The other one moved in 1990, and before she moved in, I renovated, and so that rent is higher.
Right. And so you said it's a 7-unit building or 8-unit building?
No, there are 8 rental units.
8 rental units. And you live in the building as well?
I live in the unit. I live in the building as well.
Oh, thank you very much.
We have another question, please.
Sure.
I appreciate your testimony. Could you just talk a little bit more about your tax situation? Just to go over the figures one more time.
Sure. Well, I actually had my hearing last week at the Tax Commission, and every time I go, I have to say to them, well, not every time, but this year and last year, you do understand that my rents were frozen last year, and yet you're asking me for an 8% increase on my property taxes, which represent 30% of my income, and that translates into $3,000. Now, I have gone to the hearing, I have given it my all, but, you know, it is what it is. We are really between a rock and a hard place. The Tax Commission on the one hand, and its efforts to constantly, I can have my taxes increase 35% over 5 years, and they do increase 8% every year and 35% over 5 years. Every once in a while, I testify at the hearing, and I get a little bit of a decrease. So that's my situation. Is there anything else you'd like to know about the taxes? I'm not sure what your question was.
Well, I think my question is just more about the conflict between rents being frozen,
Right,
taxes
it
going
is a
up a
conflict.
substantial rate, the city's on both sides of the transaction.
Right. It seems like the policy is warring with each other. And then we're in the middle. Thank you.
Thank you. The next three speakers will be Ingrid Elson, Brian Riley, and Ann Cunningham.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
5 times since 2004, people whose heating bills are included in their rent have paid increases in excess of everyone else. It has come to 2.5% since 2004, and with compounding, it's 3%. I sent everybody a link a few weeks ago to prices for New York Harbor heating oil. They have plummeted, and at present, down from peak prices between 60 and 75%, depending on the year you're looking at. These 5 increases should be completely rescinded. They no longer serve any purpose, and in fact, they're being compounded every year and being added to. If oil prices go back up from their lows now, then you will have the option of again passing along a 0.5% increase. In the meantime, that's extremely unlikely, according to Saudi Arabia at the head of OPEC, because they have no intentions of reducing oil production. So I hope you will consider this group of tenants that has been singled out to, on 5 occasions, pay increases in excess of everyone else, and completely revoke those increases and reduce the rents of all those parties by the 3%, which is the number that includes compounding and reflects reality. Any questions?
Any questions? No, thank you for your testimony. Brian Riley?
Hi, my name is Brian Riley. I'm a landlord in Manhattan.
Could you speak more into the
Hi, my
mic?
name is
Thank
Brian
you.
Riley. I'm a landlord in Manhattan, and it's just astounding to me, the misinformation here on landlord expenses. It's pure smoke and mirrors is what it is. Let's move past PIOC findings and RPIE reports. All the nonsense about expenses coming down for landlords is just smoke and mirrors, as I just said. When one expense goes down and 8 others go up, that is not an example of costs going down. The major thing killing rent-regulated property owners is property taxes. That's it. So let's stop talking about the other bull crap and realize that constant increases are burying small multifamily landlords, and it's our main expense, period. 65% of my units are rent regulated, and my taxes on 2 buildings on July 1st will be $317,000 and $209,000. These buildings had taxes of $35,000 and $18,000 respectively in 2003. Now, let me reiterate that. $209,000, $317,000 from $18,000 and $35,000 just 13 years ago. The luxury residential developers do not have to pay this 35% of gross income taxes that we do. They don't have to deal with the regulations we deal with. We even get fined when tenants rent out their apartments illegally. Start collecting real estate taxes from rental developers to help offset our tax burden. We house most of the rent-regulated apartments in this city, or have you forgotten that? During Bloomberg's term, he raised our taxes 20% one year and said when city finances recovered, we would get them back. I guess they never recovered. Mayor de Blasio, in his second year, said he lowered assessments and got big headlines, but failed to mention that the Department of Finance raised the tax rates and taxes still went up over 10%. Again, the smoke and mirrors effect kicking in. These taxes are also changing our neighborhoods, as small retail tenants can no longer afford the enormous tax pass-throughs. True, fuel costs have come down, so $5,000 I save on fuel.
Excuse me, your time is up. Can you wrap it up, please?
Okay, rent increases of 1%, 2%, or 3% do nothing for me at this time. I can live with low increases or no increases at all, as long as you roll back our taxes by 5%. Not keeping them the same, but actually lowering them. This will benefit all the rent-stabilized tenants you say you support and small businesses throughout the city.
Thank you. I think there's a question.
Can you just tell us, have you appealed your taxes?
Yes, I have.
And can you tell us a little bit about the appeal process?
Well, I go through a certiorari.
Could you speak into the microphone, please?
I go through a certiorari, and really, what happens is, maybe every 5 years we get a little decrease, and then that decrease is quickly eaten up a few years later when the taxes go way above what the decrease already was. So the certiorari really doesn't work for us. I mean, nothing is being done on the real estate tax front. All the other expenses really don't mean much when you consider taxes going up on a building 30 or 40 grand a year. If I get an increase of 3% on a $200 rent, my average rent-stabilized apartments are $480 a month. I have 65% rent-stabilized, the average rent is $480. So a 3% increase on that is not putting a dent in anything for me.
Thank you. Ann Cunningham?
Bring these up, please. Give them to Shirley.
Good afternoon, Ms. Cunningham.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairwoman, members of the Rent Guidelines Board, and all present. My name is Ann Cunningham. I have been testifying before this board since the early 1980s. I am a housing specialist for Manhattan Borough President Gail A. Brewer. Today I am testifying on behalf of the remaining tenants of the Tempo Hotel, formerly known as the Commander Hotel, a Class A residential SRO. In my building, there are 200 units. 136 units are high rental, and 64 are hotel rent stabilized. My landlord, AIMCO, applied for a certificate of non-harassment through the Department of HPD. Due to the years of harassment we experienced as tenants, that application was denied in January 2015. However, which I didn't put in the testimony, the landlord plans to reapply in 3 more years. A copy of the decision is included in this testimony, along with letters from long-term tenants who currently reside at the Tempo Hotel. Rents have continued to rise over the years and have contributed to the increase in homelessness, and I do see many homeless people in my work. Oftentimes, tenants must choose whether to pay rent or put food on the table. Tenants in all categories are struggling, and it would be corrupt to bless these landlords with an annual increase. While the need for reform is urgent, I sincerely appreciate the Rent Guidelines Board and the work of their staff, and thank you so much for that freeze on the rent increase for the SRO and hotel tenants. Thank you again for the pleasure of participation.
Thank you, Ms. Cunningham.
I just want to thank you.
We have a question.
And for all you've done for tenants throughout the city for so many years. You're really an inspiration to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, work is very, very important. When we love our work, we're happy with what we're doing, we continue doing it. I've been involved in the community since I'm 14. I'm going to be 81 years old this year, still at it.
Bonnie Diaz, Joanne Jolnelty, and Jonathan Hochhauser will be the next speakers.
Hi,
Good afternoon.
My name is Bonnie Diaz. I'm a property manager for some apartment buildings here on West 21st Street. Pretty much it's a great building. We do what we're doing. We have the big issue that we have is unfortunately the Airbnb. We have a lot of stabilized rentals going on in there, and we have some tenants that are literally, living around the corner in high rises, making $2,000 a week. I had one gentleman at his Florida home. That was his residence, and he wasn't living there, an illegal sublet. Another person was in California, and the last person was actually touring the world. We finally contacted him in Israel. So these people are making $2,000 a week. I understand that, everybody has a right to live, but the legal fees that it took to get these people out of the building, and it took over a year and a half. So the biggest thing that we're kind of concerned about for our building is, not being able to control that, and the landlord gets fined. We don't want them in there, but we have an issue with that. The other thing I'd like to mention is I had a tenant in there that would not let me in for 2 years to make repairs. I had to finally get a court order to get in there to make the repairs, which we want to do. I'm not interested in not making repairs. It doesn't help the building. It doesn't help me. We're trying to work with tenants. I love the tenants. I think we have a very good relationship with them. But unfortunately, these kind of circumstances put us, as stated before, between a rock and a hard place. So, the legal fees alone are an issue. Obviously, the real estate taxes are an issue. Kind of that's where it's at for us. We try to work with everybody, but unfortunately, sometimes it's really hard to play the game. So thank you for the opportunity, and everybody good luck, because we're going to need it. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question. Ms. Diaz, if you could come back.
Hi, thanks for your testimony. Could you just elaborate a little bit more about we only have jurisdiction over rent-stabilized tenants, about rent-stabilized tenants who are abusing...
Yes, these were rent-stabilized tenants.
Yeah, so could you just, for the ones that are most present in your mind, could you just kind of go over the scenario, key points?
So basically, we would have all these people coming in and out of the apartment buildings that we don't know who they are every weekend with suitcases. And the super on premise, we had some videos that we installed, and we finally realized this is an Airbnb going on. So looking at the videos and also looking on Airbnb, they're actually advertising their picture with the location of the building, and they're putting up reviews and what they're charging and what they're getting. And I finally had to hire one private detective to find out where this one gal was living in the high-rise around the corner, smart enough to keep coming into the building every day because they keep their mail address there. And so she comes into the building every day, so it looks like she lives there. So, so they're all rent-stabilized, but that's how they do it.
But in the Airbnb example, I just want to have a sense of proportion. What were they renting it for versus what was their monthly rent?
This girl's rent was maybe $1,300 and change, and she was getting $150 to $2 a night. So she was getting $2,000 to $2,500 a week for what she was doing.
Okay, thank you.
So Can I follow up on that? Because I think we all think that Airbnb is, it's destroying a lot of rent-stabilized housing. I think it's really a terrible thing in New York City, and that business model is destroying lots of tenants. But I do think we're here to talk about what guidelines increases we set for millions of New Yorkers, right? And we shouldn't set an example of one or bad tenants who are using Airbnb.
I had 4 bad tenants.
Four.
Excuse me, but I appreciate what you're saying, but these people are paying such low rents, we don't get an increase, and they're, traveling the world. And
Right.
that money that they're using to travel the world, why can't I have that reimbursed for my legal expenses?
Because we're talking about the millions of tenants who don't have that money. We're talking about millions of tenants who, the 1% increase will mean they can't maybe be able to stay there. The 1% means that we may look at an increase in homelessness. The 1% increase might mean they can't send their kids on field trips, or go to school at lunch, or buy a lunchbox, or backpack, or sneakers for school.
I appreciate what you're saying, but rent stabilization is being misused however you want to flip it. So this is rent stabilization. These people are paying low rents.
Right.
They're moved out. They're making astronomical amounts of money. So I'm saying, at least if we can get them out and get the rents up to
Right.
get something back.
Right.
I appreciate what you're saying, but at the same time, we're between a rock and a hard place, so.
Yeah, I think the only focus here is just, we think, Airbnb is bad and it's not good for tenants, and let's focus on the larger picture of how we preserve a city that we all care about.
Thank you.
Thank you. Joanne Giovanelti?
Greetings, respected members of the RGB and fellow New Yorkers. I'm a former book editor who's been living in the same rent-stabilized unit in the East Village for the last 16 years. My apartment is one of 16 units. My landlord owns multiple buildings. Together with my boyfriend, I share a 400-square-foot box in the third-floor walk-up on East 11th Street circa 1872. We love New York City. We love our space, yet we cannot afford to continue to pay increasingly inflated rents for the same crumbling housing. At the same time, we cannot afford to move. It's a catch-22 that binds many hardworking New Yorkers to their places, often resulting in property owners taking an aggressive stance against those vulnerable by taking people sometimes on multiple occasions to housing court. What remains is a bloated tenant blacklist that will ultimately bar those same tenants from ever securing an apartment in New York City again. I am on that list along with hundreds of thousands of my fellow New Yorkers. Back to the catch-22. My inability to pay rent in a timely fashion is due to underemployment, the speed of changing technology, and a switch to a consulting gig economy, but also the historically exorbitant rents increases under Bloomberg's unprecedented 3-term, 12-year mayorship. From 2002 to 2014, Bloomberg's appointed RGB committee had a distinct single-minded agenda. While the mayor closed the $3 billion deficit gap, at least in part by raising property taxes, he offset that burden by building owners, that burden to building owners by compensating them generously with ongoing rent increases, even after the economy had essentially ground to a halt in 2008 due to the banking and housing market collapse. Immediately after that recession took hold, while workers' wages were stagnant at best and job loss was at an all-time high, property owners experienced rental incomes rise by 16%, from $11.42 a month in 2009 to more than $13.30 a month in 2013, according to the board's own calculations as reported by the Metropolitan Council on Housing. By comparison, the rest of the country saw rental rates actually decrease by roughly 2%. My base rent has nearly doubled since 2000, rising 46% in 16 years. I pay more than $650 a month for 400 square feet. I can't pick up the slack for rising property taxes anymore. The jobs are not coming back. I worked in publishing. I loved my job, but I'm not getting another one anytime soon. I urge the board, and I applaud you for your past decision last year on the rent freeze. I was shocked. After we first came to New York and we talked at the first Guideline Board's meeting when we first got here, I never talked again because I thought it was a moot point. Last year was a revelation. Please, please, I'm urging you. I'm not paying $400 a month for some small apartment. I'm not eligible for SCREE. I'm not renting my apartment on Airbnb. I'm trying to start a business. I'm trying to survive. I don't even have a kid. We couldn't do that, not with these rents. We love New York City. We are part of the backbone of this city. Please, for working class and people here in New York, please, I know you can't give us the rent rollback, but give us the freeze. Thank you.
Thank you.
And a lot of landlords, whether you realize it or not, are making a lot of illegal profits. They rent out those spaces on the top of their roofs for cell phone towers. There's constant street-level advertising that they make money for, and a lot of them also use Airbnb for a profit. And Airbnb is coming under regulation and city control, so people can no longer advertise their entire apartments on there any longer. So the regulation is coming. Don't punish people who have been paying, under Bloomberg, 16% increase, okay, over that time. We really deserve a rent rollback. You guys have to really listen to the New Yorkers. You're appointed to represent working class people.
Jonathan Hockhauser?
My name is Jonathan Hockhauser. I'm the fourth generation of a family that owns and manages 6 multifamily mixed-use buildings in Manhattan. We have owned these properties for about half a century and have a mix of long-term and more recently moved-in tenants. We have 2 remaining rent-control tenants, only 4 free market tenants, and the rest are rent-stabilized. And we have a personal relationship with many of these people. While it is the case that energy costs have been lower the past couple of years, it is not the case that this means some great windfall to us. Our buildings are over 100 years old and require significant maintenance and repair. In the past few years, we have spent more than $1.5 million on an exterior and basement work across these buildings. In some cases, we did receive MCI increases, but in most cases, it was work that wasn't eligible or situations where we chose not to file. Therefore, we were spending the money because the buildings required the investment, and despite the cost to us, we felt it was important. Additionally, real estate taxes continue to skyrocket so that it feels like it is the city, not the owners, that benefits from whatever increases do get achieved. The tenants who have been with us for the longest have rents that barely cover basic costs. In the past, we could at least count on the 2%, 4%, or 6% increases to keep things moving along and figure that in conjunction with an occasional vacancy, revenue would meet rising taxes, energy, which up until a couple of years ago was a disproportionately large expense, expenses associated with statutory requirements and general building maintenance. But with 0% and 1% increases, this is simply not the case. And it has the perverse and counterproductive effect of pushing us to make up the difference on vacancies, further polarizing the city's tenancy. In any given building, I have many tenants who are paying market or close enough to market that it doesn't matter there. But it is the remaining block of apartments where the rents, even with the somewhat more reasonable increases from the past, simply have fallen too far below not just the market, but what is necessary to cover our expenses, that a rent freeze is an injustice. I have had many tenants ask if we have any intentions of selling our buildings. They ask in fear because they know that not all owners have their interests in mind. I used to say no, but the recent direction of the RGB guidelines has forced us to revisit this question. Thank you.
Any questions? I have a question.
Just 2 things, if you could elaborate a little bit more. You mentioned exterior work, so I'm assuming part of that scope is local law 11 facade inspections?
Not required. Not related to that. Just
not related to, okay.
Just, loose bricks, parapet walls haven't been replaced in forever, roofs. So
you have masonry
fire
buildings.
escape. Yeah.
You need to keep them safe. Okay. And on the point about rents not covering costs, can you give us a couple concrete examples?
Yeah, I mean, people that have been around for 30, 40 plus years and are paying $600 or $700 a month still, which does not represent the majority, but is a legitimate presence. It simply doesn't cover their share of water and taxes and energy, as well as maintenance and upkeep. They're literally being subsidized by their neighbors.
Yeah, so can you tell us how many units you own in those 6 buildings?
Yeah, there are a total of, I think it's 78 residential units, as well as 7 small storefronts.
And you said 2 are rent controlled?
2.
And how many are rent stabilized?
everything minus 6. There are 4 free market and 2 rent control. So it's our business, rent stabilization.
So you have 70 rent stabilized, 2 rent controlled, and a handful of market rent tenants?
Yeah.
And you said how many are at 400 or 500, you said?
I said 600 or 700, or 7, I didn't say 400 or
Yeah, so
500.
600, how many?
I would say, maybe a quarter or below 1,000,
Quarter below.
somewhere between 650 and 1,000.
Okay. And so at 3/4 or above 1,000, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. The next 3 speakers are Bobby Sackman, Abraham Musafi, and Richard Steiger. Bobby Sackman left, all right. Then Abraham Musafi. She's coming back, okay. She can register. Yeah.
Oh, Bobby's there, actually.
Good afternoon to the board.
Okay,
Good
well, we'll
afternoon
take
to
her-
the landlord. Good afternoon to the tenants. I'm a small landlord. We have 2 buildings, one on West 49 and one in West 42nd Street, 52nd, I'm sorry. And regarding the Airbnb, I just have to have really a tenant that moved to another building, and she did that, and the landlord was fined $60,000 for her and $250,000 more for other tenants. I don't understand why the landlord has to be held responsible. Whoever make Airbnb, landlord or tenant, should be punished as well. Because if the tenant doesn't stop in a red light or doesn't stop on a set sign, they don't blame the landlord for it. So if the tenant make rental for Airbnb, he should be held responsible, not the tenant, not the landlord. They held the landlord responsible. Now there is another article here, they're talking about holding the tenant responsible. About time, I think. Now another thing regarding the real estate taxes. I have one building in West 52nd Street that I'm saying 2 years ago was $64,000 to the best of my knowledge. This year I got $84,000, went up by $20,000. I don't understand why. The real estate taxes is just a killer. They cannot really increase it fast enough. I don't understand what happened. They used to increase it once every 5 years. Now they increase it 5 times every year. This is just impossible. And I have another problem really here. I have really this building on 52nd. I have 2 decontrolled and 18 rent stabilized. And even the decontrolled, I cannot charge even enough money because simply I can't rent it. I can charge $1,600, $1,700 when the rent is probably around $2,000. So all the other apartments, really I have one person pay $580 and he live by himself. He bring his family from overseas, from down South America, wife and 3 children. It's a 1-bedroom apartment. It's really not even 1 bedroom, it's a studio. It's 160 square feet. 4 people live there. Used to be 1 person, now it's 4 people live there. This is not acceptable. And besides, when they came in, they brought 2 more relatives for another 2 weeks living with them, just to visit them when they came. They came from Long Island to visit them when they came from South America. This is also, I don't understand how this works here. I pay water and sewer $18,000 a year. My water and sewer bill keep going up because I rented for 1 person. Before I know there's 3 people, 4 people living in the apartment. I don't understand how that goes.
Thank you, sir. Your time is up. Are there
You're
any
welcome.
questions?
No, I don't have any other questions.
No questions. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Any question from you guys?
No, thank you. Did Bobby Sackman come back? All right.
Hi, I'm Bobby Sackman, Director of Public Policy with Live On New York, and one of the things we do is we have an affordable senior housing coalition comprised of 25 of the leading nonprofits in the city that build affordable housing, and altogether have 20,000 units for senior housing. We did a study this year that showed that over 200,000 seniors in this city are waiting for Section 202 housing, an average of 7 years. Obviously, most of them will never see the inside of any of those apartments. So we can't build our way out of this crisis, as we all know, and preservation is key. And one of the best preservation programs in this city, both for the tenant and for rent-stabilized stock, is SCREE. Only 43% of those eligible use SCREE. It's been around since at least 1970. We know that because we know somebody who actually did applications then. So 46 years, 43% utilization. We just did a report, this is what I've handed you, it's on our website, that 55% of the people on SCREE are rent burdened or severely rent burdened, which means they're paying 50 to 70% of their income in rent. So already they're in rent-stabilized stock, they're getting SCREE, and they're paying 50 to 70% or more of their income in rent. So we're also asking for a rollback, but our rollback's a little bit different. We want everybody on SCREE to be rolled back to pay no more than 1/3 of their income in rent. Period, end of story. Just cap it. We also want an outreach and enrollment program and a public awareness program the size of what the city did for universal pre-K. To have a program around for 46 years at least that people don't know about is a shame, because the longer they wait, the higher the percentage they're paying in their income to rent. And many, of course, never get it at all. And so this is what we're asking now, and you all have our copies, and I'm really done. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a question, if you would have a moment, please.
Hi, thanks for your testimony. As an owner, I couldn't agree with you more about SCREE. It is really a travesty that it's not used more. In your proposal about making it more like a new construction building where people start out at baseline 30% of their income, are you also proposing that the Department of Finance would credit owners back for that delta, or you're just keeping it as reduce the rent to 30%?
No, this would cost the city a lot of money. We're proposing that the tax abatement that exists would continue, and even for the 43% on it now, by our calculations, it's over $300 million a year. This is not a cheap item, but this is what it's going to take to keep people in their apartments who aren't going to go out and probably earn a living for the most part, and to preserve that stock. Does that answer your question? We want it to be
not really. I mean,
we want it to be the same SCREE program, that you would get a tax abatement.
You do. So landlords would be able to financially pay for their expenses, but the tenant would get the credit back, or it would come back.
Well, the way it works
through the tax
now. I
credit.
can't tell you if you could pay
Just
for all
how-
your
just how it
expenses.
works.
I've been listening to everybody else here, so. But yes, it would be the same way it works now. Just that everybody, from the viewpoint of the senior, it would cap it. The other benefit, if I could just add, is anyone who's caught in that bind of preferential rents, which is we're learning more about, if you cap it at 1/3 of someone's income, preferential rent doesn't matter anymore. You're just capping it.
So can I just ask, can you tell us what you're seeing on the streets, so like for seniors, what's happening to them? You know, are we seeing, with the rent increases not applying to SCREE, what's going on?
Well, I think, what's happening is probably what we all sort of can imagine. There was actually a recent Harvard study, wasn't about New York City, but it might as well have been, that shows that people that are rent burdened don't eat. They don't eat all their meals. They don't get all their health care. So you can multiply that if you're an older adult. So I think what we're seeing is that people are living at their edge. A woman in Bay Ridge, what happens is if your spouse dies and you lose your Social Security at that moment, you go downhill financially, and this woman she's been selling her furniture and jewelry. And we know about that, and I'm sure there's many like her. So what's going on is that seniors are being told in this city in many different ways that you're on your own. We're not going to help you pay your rent. We're not going to advertise it. We're not going to give you services you need. You're just on your own. And we really think at this point that this, even though it's expensive, that this is a reasonable request. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Richard Steiger?
Good afternoon. Honorable Chair, distinguished members of the board, thank you all for your service. My name is Richard Steiger, and I am a retired civil servant. My wife and I reside in a rent-stabilized apartment. I respectfully request the board roll back rents this year. That action is fully merited. Your own studies indicate the price of operating rent-stabilized apartments decreased 1.2% this year, mostly due to the fact that fuel costs decreased a whopping 41.2%. In prior years, substantial rent increases were approved when fuel costs skyrocketed. Shouldn't reductions be taken when fuel costs plummet more than 40%? There should be a level playing field for owners and renters, and that is the responsibility of the board to ensure equity and fairness for both parties. It is a vitally important function for this deliberative body. And bear in mind that decisions you make next Monday could be the difference between a person staying in their apartment or perhaps becoming homeless. My wife and I pay 54% of our pensions and Social Security towards rent. Conventional wisdom when I was growing up says you should allocate about 30% of your income for rent. But my figure pales in comparison to other New Yorkers who I've heard pay upwards of 70% of income to rent an apartment. Over the years, I've met many young people, and a common thread of our conversations is that they couldn't afford to live in New York City. Sadly, a good number of them left, and all New Yorkers are the poorer for it. We will never benefit from their intelligence, vitality, spirit, caring, and the contributions they could have rendered to our illustrious city. I believe a society is judged ultimately on how it treats the weakest among us. Please consider the many New Yorkers who are just barely hanging on and vote for a rollback of rents. It would be the perfect second act to your historic rent freeze decision last year. Thank you for your time, attention, and decency.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Steiger? Thank you. The next three speakers will be Alan Weinstein, Sharon Kahns, and Robert Black. Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Alan Weinstein. I'm a property owner and manager of over 125 units in the East Village. Of this number, half are rent-stabilized units. I'm presenting you an actual case study of one of our units. The numbers will speak for themselves. Here's a scenario that exists in our rent-stabilized 3-bedroom unit, a 5-room apartment. To understand this, let's go back to 2006. In 2006, the tenant's monthly rent was $601. Our water bill was $12,000, and our taxes were $67,000. In 2016, the tenant's rent is $769, an increase of 28%. If that sounds high, just listen. In 2016, our water bill is $29,000, increase of 141%. In 2016, our real estate taxes jumped to $162,000, an increase of 142%. If the tenant's increase had followed the water rate increase inflicted upon the landlords, his rent would now be $1448. Again, this is affordable for a 5-room apartment in Manhattan. If the tenant's rent had the same increase as the real estate taxes, it would be $1442, still well below the market rent for a 5-room apartment in Manhattan. If both the water rate increase and the real estate taxes were combined, the rent would be $2861. That's 4.8 times what he was currently paying in 2006. That's still below the market rate, which is about $4850. I am thus not only affordable housing, but housing below the allowances for city housing and Section 8 housing. I receive absolutely no tax benefits or incentives from the city. If the city were truly concerned about the affordable housing and eliminating this yearly fiasco of tenant-landlord theater, the city would rethink its formulation of increases and take bold, decisive action. Here are 2 suggestions. The rent increases for rent-stabilized tenants should be the same as the annual real estate and water or tax increases, or allow the landlords more equitable rents and protect the tenants from increases by adopting a SCREE type of program whereby the rent increases would be returned to the landlords as tax rebate savings. Tenants would be required to present financial information to the city upon their lease renewals, and the city would then determine what amount is to be payable by the tenant and what amount would be given to the landlord as tax savings rebate.
Thank you. Let's see if there are any questions.
Yeah, so I live in the East Village, so I'm interested about this building. You said you have a building with a tenant who pays $769. How many unit building is that?
28.
28. And half of them are rent stabilized, you said?
Out of the 125 units that we have, half are rent stabilized. We have a 47-unit building, only 12 units are destabilized. We have a 16-unit building, in that building, we only have 4 stabilized in that building. In the 28, 14 units are stabilized.
So the building you're talking about with the $769 rent, is your income exceed your expenses?
My income is no one's business. I mean, let's be honest
Because that you apply for a hardship increase.
I'm not complaining hardship. What I'm complaining is that rent stabilization is not affordable housing. It is not the landlord's job to present housing for New York City. This is privately owned. No, it's not.
You bought a building that's rent stabilized tenants in it.
First of all,
right?
know your
Rent
facts.
stabilized tenants have a right to stay.
Just
They have a right to renewal leases.
One at a time.
And so, the idea of rent stabilized housing is to maintain affordable housing in New York City, and we set the guidelines increases to allow you to reasonable increases to ensure you make enough profit.
That's great. Do you know the original reason why rent stabilization is in place?
We have a housing crisis in New York City.
When?
Every year since 1974 when rent stabilization went into effect.
The real reason why rent stabilization was put into effect was for our veterans when they came home from World War II. So let's get our facts straight a little bit, okay? So these laws...
Rent control, you mean? Let's get our facts correct. Rent stabilization didn't go into effect until 74.
Excuse me. Let's let one another finish, please.
Which turned into rent stabilization. And what my bottom line is no one's business.
Okay, then thank you.
You're welcome.
Are any other questions for the speaker? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Sharon Kahns, please.
Hello.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm a president.
Can you pull the microphone down toward you?
Yes.
Yeah, excellent.
I'm the president of the Tenant Association in the Upper West Side. Our buildings started out as Mitchell-Lama, they became rent stabilized. We have an 8-story building. Our landlord has given me 4 MCIs in the last 2 years. And let me say, one was on the roof for a fixing of the roof, and then we found he put a satellite up there, so we don't know if he did it to stabilize the roof for the satellite, which he's making money off of, or the roof really needed it. And we can talk about the community room he took away so that he could put a boiler in there that nobody asked for, and that he heats up our apartment this year in May when it was a very warm month. So, in past years, that never happened. I'm just saying that our landlord, which is one of the wealthier ones in New York City, while he's asking us for one MCI after another for terraces that he did not fix, he says, well, I'll do the next 50% of them in 5 years. I don't have the money, but he's buying up several buildings on the Upper West Side this past year. So if you don't have the money, why are you buying buildings? And again, he's one of the richer ones. And so I'm saying, in the meantime, we are doing really poorly, and we're elderly people for the most part. Our kids can't stay with us, and because they can't afford the rents, and it's just unfair. It's about the wealthy landlords are doing very, very well, and most of us are not doing well at all. In fact, we're being kicked out of our houses. We had 7 TPU cases, and every one of them went in housing court, but we're still waiting for DHCR after a year to resolve those, you know, what they've got to say about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert Black.
You see how intoxicating this meeting is? I must say that I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. You know, it's strange because a few minutes before I arrived here, I spoke to someone on the phone, and they told me that they had just been tricked into signing a paper along with their lease that stated that they would give up their apartment for religious purposes if someone needed to move in. I don't even know if that's legal, but this is the kind of trickery that landlords are, and we have to be sympathetic to some of the landlords. The ones that are independent, they do have direct problems, but let's face it, when you read the papers, the whole city's corrupt. You know, the popular phrase is that the USA is a nation of immigrants. It depends on how far back in history. To the panel, name 2 countries that are not a nation of immigrants. Because if you consider the migratory habits of people in Europe, Asia, Africa, every 40, 50 years the boundaries change. But that's a minute point. Growing up, my nation brainwashed me into believing that it was better to be dead than red. Now, communist nations are financially keeping us afloat, economically, that is. I mean, could you imagine a young black kid growing up being subject to the abuse that the country has bestowed upon them and aspiring to at least say, we are the best? That no longer exists. Now you hear the current wave of leadership saying, well, we're going to be just like everyone else. No, America has always fought to be special, despite its abuses of privilege. I was a young black man growing up in Harlem, took great pride in the fact that despite racism, my World War II veteran father was given the opportunity to raise his family in decent housing as a reward for enduring the pain of military service. Blacks and Ricans are currently being forced out of long-term residence because greed has corrupted even the once best intention. And that applies to the so-called activists and everyone else, because unfortunately today our economy and our lifestyle is based on greed. Lastly, I just want to say, why can't we have a homeland too? Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to take a 10-minute break. After the break, the speakers will be Ann Korchak, Scott Tankersley, and Tiffany Lee.